Today, we are going to show you how to tap into your intuition, listen to that small, still voice inside of you so you can follow your path of absolute bliss.
Let's guzzle down some bliss. I love you. Be blessed.
Welcome to the Blissful Breakfast with Breegs, Aaliyah, and Jade.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Welcome.
This is such a legendary time, you guys. This is so beautiful. I think we found the topic. As I was fixing up my coffee, Jade, I just quick called Aaliyah just to be like, oh my God, just to touch base, make sure we're good and apologize for our scheduling and my stupidity. And it was just funny because I was mentioned dude, I started getting a little bit of resistance last night. I was listening to your Marco Polos, Jade, and they're beautiful. And you started talking about topics and stuff you want to do. I'm like, yeah, okay. I'm like, no, that doesn't resonate with me. I'm like, oh, okay, that one on contraction and hearing the still voice of God, the what Sahara Rose talks about, the contraction and what's the other word? Expansion. I was like, ooh, that's interesting. So you mentioned you just like to go with the flow. You don't want to have to plan or think too much or have to have a thing. And I must have had some past experience of fucking it up so bad. I got mildly, triggered, but just about that. And so something in me was rising up and then this morning there was some more resistance. So Aaliyah was when you address or observe the resistance and you can acknowledge it and then you get more of it. But then there's also the War of Art. I know Aaliyah, you've read that. I don't know if Jade, you've read that. No. But he talks about as a creator, a creative force, as a writer, an artist, as whatever we're meant to do on this earth. There's resistance, the lack of self-belief, the establishment, you want to procrastinate, you want to take the easy route out, you want to be safe, you don't want to go out into the unknown. And so he talks about battling resistance. So I kind of felt like that, ooh, it must be. And I don't I abandoned the belief of that any fucking negative entity is going to fuck with me. Those fuckers, I'm protected. They can't touch me. But there's a thing where if you're doing some fucking glorious work that, you're going to attract some people that want to take you down. So I don't know.
Oh, you already know, Briggs, based off of some of the shit that I've told you about that I've gone through, that no matter how high you be vibrating, the universe is going to be like, you thought, all right, here's this person to come fuck your shit up. Or this situation to come just absolutely bust through your walls and ruin your fucking life for just a second, throw you off path. And then you have to figure it out, get it back together, and everything is going to be so much better after that.
I love you guys acknowledging that, verbally acknowledging it, because you're putting words to my experience that I haven't had before. And now I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, this is a kind of a manifestation thing too, isn't it? Those tests and that anchoring into identity, because it's, you're always kind of climbing to the next level. Not always, I feel like climbing is the wrong word, but moving towards the next thing, going on your way to the next level. But in each phase, we have these things that we got to tackle. And I think when we hit that point, we're like, yeah. And then something comes in, it's all right, well, do you still believe?
Yes.
It's in all the wisdom writings of there's a check, there's a to prove, do you still want it? It's here for you. There's just a little bit of a gentle, are you sure? It's kind of like the parent, having a kid, or even Aaliyah, you have brought siblings that you basically parent, and there's a check of are you sure you want that? Yesterday you wanted caramel, today you want to watch the show, tomorrow you want Barbies. It's are you sure you want it? And you kind of double check with them, you take it away, and they're they can either choose to say, yes, I still want that, or not. And I think it must be like that. It's so true, because there's always a check.
I actually
universe.
just talked about this in the episode I uploaded yesterday. I recorded it yesterday and uploaded it. This is so crazy. I was like, when I did OnlyFans, I did it because I asked for validation from people when I thought I was asking for advice. And those people that were validating me were giving me ease in that moment for this gut feeling that I had that was challenging my moral belief system. And I went with that because everyone was validating me, telling me it was okay, but I didn't listen to that. So I realize now after the whole experience that, yeah, there was this opportunity dangled in front of me to make good money, but it challenged my moral belief system. And I went with that path, and there was a fuck ton of resistance and a lot of bad shit that came with it because I went off track of what I actually believe to be true for myself and what I actually envision my higher self to look like. Because my higher self is not doing that, but I did it because it was the easy way out. It was the path of least resistance. So that's why I did that. And it was a challenge that the universe had to put in my path. Otherwise, life would have been so easy at that point in time, you know?
Oh my gosh.
I bet it clarified your why, didn't it? Like what you want and why.
So much. I had people in my life being like, girl, now's the time. You have to figure out what you want to do. You cannot just post pictures of your body for the rest of your life. And I'm like, no. Like, it's fine. I'm making all my rent money. Like, I'm doing all this things, whatever. Like, I felt like such a badass because I could like pay for my own stuff and do like whatever. But actually, when I sat with myself, I felt like shit because that wasn't the way that I wanted to actually live. But it was easy. It was so easy to be able to make that money and do it. And then after, I was like, oh my God, after I quit, that's when I rebranded the podcast. That's when I actually started to make things move with like my actual purpose,
Oh my gosh,
man.
what you're saying, it reminds me of this.
What? I have that in my fucking notes to read that book. Oh my gosh.
Read it. It literally fell off the shelf at me.
What?
Oh yeah, that's when you're supposed to read the book, right? When it falls off the shelf.
For those just listening, what book is that? The North Star?
Finding Your Own North Star by Martha Beck. So this moves into that expansion and contraction that we were talking about. And she explains how to find I'm still early in the book, less than a quarter of the way through, but I know this book has been a guide for so many people because she helps you find that inner compass to listen to your intuition, to tap into your highest self. She refers to it as the essential self and the social self, those two selves, like Jesus talked about, son of man, son of God.
I love that. We're so aligned. This is the first time that we're ever like talking to, if anyone's listening to this, like I know Jade, I know of Jade. I've actually worked for Jade's brother, but this is the first time that we're connecting. And I feel like this is so easy. Like the connection is there. It has been there for a millennia of time.
We have definitely been on this whole journey together for many lifetimes.
So crazy.
Yeah, soul fam. That is
Yes.
so beautiful. Okay, so I have a question. So how do you tell the difference between what your internal guidance is trying to tell you? Like for Aaliyah, it was clear that resistance was because you kind of made a choice to go down a path that wasn't in your fullest alignment. But how do you tell the difference between that and the resistance, like in the war of art, that it's like the resistance you're going to come across when you are going down your path that's trying to double check you or prevent you from like really succeeding in your dreams, that like the resistance that like, I want to sleep in, or I'm going to procrastinate, or I'm going to avoid doing the hard work that I know is going to lead to my success, but it's just easier to watch TV or play video games or to be safe or whatever. How do you tell, both of you, how do you tell the difference? Jade?
I think I know. Afterward, do you feel good or feel bad if you're not doing what you know you do? And it's in that like moving in the direction that you got to go, or like following your intuition. It's usually like I don't want to do that. That doesn't sound fun. I want to avoid it. but I feel it somewhere in my body. I usually feel it around my like solar plexus chakra. It's like
Yes.
this weird pull, even though it doesn't make sense logically. Oftentimes it is scary, but there's still this weird little appeal to it. That's like, but then my logical self is like, fuck no, man. It's like, like, and then so it's like, you start to feel good when you think about it, but then when you start to overthink it, you feel bad, right? So it's like you go with that initial feeling. You got to catch it quick, because otherwise you'll talk yourself out of it. And then ultimately, like, look at the after effects of the decisions of sleeping in, of, like spending excess time on crap that isn't in alignment with your values. You always feel crappy afterward.
Yeah. Oh my God. It's so simple. Of course it's simple. Of course it's just the easy answer that's easy to avoid, but it's simple. It's always simple.
Unfortunately, at this point in my life, it's always after I make a decision that I realize it was wrong. But when I sit with it and I think about, okay, what was I feeling when I made that decision? I can usually go back and like actually hear that inner voice, that little tiny whisper in the back of my mind telling me, you probably shouldn't do this. You probably shouldn't do this. And then after I do it, I kind of distract myself with something else so I don't have time to think about it until like days later when I'm actually sitting with my shit. But when it's something that I know, that resistance that is in alignment with my higher self, like sometimes I struggle to sit down and record a podcast because I know it's going to take me a couple of hours, right? When I would just want to like go out and work, make money, do some other things. I love the podcast. I know it adds value to people's lives. I always am happy when I'm done recording it, but it's showing up. That's the hardest part for me. But when I think about how I'm going to feel after a run, after a workout, after waking up early, after doing something that I know is good for me, like thinking about how I'm going to feel after, I can get a glimpse of that like refreshing sigh of relief. I know it's like, it's going to make me feel in a flow state. That's when I know like I can lean into those things, and that's in the best interest of my higher self. And the voices sound different in my head too. I don't know if it's the same for you guys, but the one that's telling me like, don't do this is like very quiet and is like, hey, if you slow down and you pay attention, you can actually hear me telling you, don't do this, don't do this.
Oh my God, yes.
That's the most precious inner voice I've ever heard.
That's the thing is like, you have to slow down to hear it. You have to, because if you stay going at like the speed of technology, you miss it. And I think that's why meditation, like having a practice, which again, man, it is so freaking hard to keep it right. But it's so critical. That really helps support it, because then you're slowing down enough to hear that voice.
Yeah. But then going back to like what I had said about distracting myself after, like I find myself doing that. So whenever like I would be engaging with OnlyFans, let's keep using that for an example, because that was what I had started off with. Every time after I would like post onto it, I would go distract myself by going out and having a drink with my friends, or like going out and like doing something, like going on my phone, scrolling through social media, doing something that I don't have to think afterward about what I just had done. You know what I mean? But if I sat with it, that voice would only grow stronger and stronger and get louder and louder. And me, as the aware, conscious human being that I am, I'm conscious enough to know I don't like to hear that voice. So I'm going to distract myself with some third dimensional things to make sure I don't have to hear that until later on when I'm paying the consequences of it.
We are really good. Like people in our society have been trained to be really good at that. Like we're all so good at avoiding that voice. I know we all know ourselves and our family members, all sorts of friends who they just are constantly avoiding that voice and filling their space with work, with this, with that, with whatever. And it's so easy to do that. And it's so true. It's so simple. And when you just sit with yourself, you're going to feel it. You're going to hear it. And it's a practice that we should be learning since we're, little, but there isn't a mainstream education for that yet. So,
Yet.
Yeah.
I really do think like we are conditioned by society, by our culture. And I imagine as well, like generationally, like what's been passed down, to look outside of ourselves. And that's the thing, Aaliyah, like as you're describing your experience with OnlyFans, I'm like, oh my gosh, I could take this and apply this to so many different parts of my life. And it's, coming back to self, which is like coming back to the divine, sitting with the self. And it's just like we never find contentment when we're looking outside of ourselves. It's always an internal thing. And it's so easy to run from ourselves because we've been taught that we can find what we're looking for outside of ourselves. Right. And we avoid when we're afraid of facing ourselves because, I think deep down we know the answer. And also it can feel really lonely.
Yes.
Oh, I hate that part.
Yes, absolutely. I actually will have this linked in the description for anybody who is listening, but I sent a video over to Breegs talking about the third dimension, fourth dimension, and fifth dimension, breaking down the levels of consciousness. And he talks about why does everybody want to be in the fifth dimension? Because when you're in the fifth dimension, you don't feel any sort of pain when somebody passes away. You just are at peace with everything in your life. It is what it is, right? There's no actual human emotion feeling inside of that. Being in the fifth dimension, it's a beautiful place to want to go to, but once you get there, you almost want to go back down because it's boring up there. Everything is it is what it is, right? So we jump down, we dabble into the third dimension, we do things that we know you guys, especially like us as awake and conscious human beings, we will choose to dabble into third dimensional things because it makes us feel something. And we already know that when we're in the fifth dimension and we're just at peace with everything, that, life can kind of it can be boring in a sense, I guess, if you are just constantly living at that state of absolute peace. So we choose to just come down to the fourth and dabble in the third a little bit.
Yeah. And we were just talking about that yesterday. Jade, that's the Aubrey Marcus episode with Matthias or what? And I believe you've already listened to that, right?
I can't believe I found that same freaking video.
What?
Yeah, my friend, he's Bob Russo. I love him. He's a coach, and he's into all the different dimensions, and you can just see it all over him. He is not in this dimension half the time. He's in his bliss spot. He's spontaneously astral projected. He's just he's into, he's so cool. And he sent me this video with Matthias and Aubrey Marcus, and Matthias was explaining all the different dimensions. I haven't made it all the way through because my brain was just I got to go back.
Do it in chunks. Yeah. It's so good, but yeah.
and then it was so funny because Mike was talking about it last night. I'm listening to his Marco Polo, and I'm like, is that the same interview? What?
That's so
Of course it is.
And I'm the one who sent it to Breegs.
You did.
Too.
Aaliyah sent me the clip, and I was I just went straight to the main one, and I listened to the whole thing, and I'm oh my God, I sent it to a few people, and I was this guy, as I think I've seen Gaia ads from him before talking about Atlantis, because he remembers all his past lives in Atlantis. I'm oh yeah, that's so fascinating. And then he has such a great grasp of the dimensions. I absolutely love it. So then I went on a tangent when I was sending a Marco Polo to Jade about what dimension is when you die and you go to the ether, when your soul is in soul review before you incarnate. I'm just is that a higher dimension, or is that this space that is one with God? That is where is that? And what is that a part of eternity? Or does every physical or every sort of experience outside of pure source light, is that technically an incarnation? And so the idea we have, the classical idea of heaven, of where we can, do whatever we want, fly around and have this blissful time, which I believe there's experiences we can have like that. Is that technically just a different type of incarnation? So anyway, I had a tangent that I sent to Jade based off of his talk of the dimensions. So, but I'm glad you bring up the third and the fifth dimension thing, because I think a big part of his thing was embracing this world that we're in. You got to love the third dimension in order to be in the fifth. You have to like accept this, your ego. You have to accept the world, the physical world, and then learn how. And Jade, you've talked to me about this, about learning how to embrace the avatar, but from your higher self perspective, and combine the two. You mix the two. You enjoy this physical life and all the pleasures and difficulties and emotions it has, but you just awaken your higher self and be able to see through and just have more control over your character. I think that's a really good, it's probably hard for some people to grasp, but it is like a comforting thing of like, we don't need to fight our body, fight the world we live in, try to escape the matrix. And if it's about integrating and loving it and having fun and playing with it, and realize, ooh, we have cheat codes if we learn how to practice the right combination.
Yes, I love that. I love that you had mentioned too, just like that we have to really love this dimension, because I tried to skip several dimensions when I was on my first, like the beginning of my spiritual awakening. I was like, fuck the third, fuck the fourth. I'm going right to the fifth. Like, I don't need any of this shit. And I was definitely there for a while where I was just at a place of absolute peace and everything was flowing. I had everything provided for me from the universe. I never questioned anything until I actually awoken to the third dimension, how the world actually operates, how important it is for me to understand it so that I collectively can help pull people out of it. So I was like, I was here, and then I went here, and then I went here, and I stayed here for a while, got really comfortable with it, loved it. It kind of sucked for a while, but you know, now I can play with all of these different dimensions. And I'll be honest with you, yeah, it's not always to be just always in the fifth dimension like that. That's just not realistic. If we were always chilling in the fifth dimension, we would probably have ascended at this point. I feel like, you know, there would be nothing left for us here to learn, to do, if we were always constantly in the state of the fifth dimension. So, but when you've been there and you've experienced what that absolute bliss feels like and just being at peace with your life, then you have a greater appreciation for being in the third dimension and the fourth dimension and being able to help raise the vibration of those that are in that dimension. Like you had mentioned, Briggs, this might be hard for some people to grasp. And at one point, this concept probably was hard for you and Jade and for me to grasp. You know, we all start somewhere, but you have to understand each dimension to be able to bring people to the next dimension, because ultimately the goal of any religion, spirituality, evolution is to see each other as one. You know, when you're helping yourself, you're helping other people. And when you're hurting yourself, you're hurting other people. So what's going on in our external world is nothing more than what's going on in my mind and Briggs' mind and Jade's mind and the listener's mind. And collectively, like we all have to heal in order to be able for everybody to ascend. And then I believe when we're all living in the fifth dimension, that would be the heaven on earth moment that we can all hope for, right? But as long as there is all this third dimensional external bullshit going on and people that are unhealed, that can't happen. So we as light workers have to kind of play with the different levels of consciousness and just accept and love wherever we're at for that given day, that given week or month or whatever it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. Can I crack this open? I've got
Crack it, baby.
Crack it right open.
That was amazing. Okay. Okay. So a couple questions. Would ascension, you know, because I hear this talk about like ascension, like ascending to higher dimensions. First question, and I got a few. Is that the rapture?
I believe so. I truly do believe that. I've always believed that as a kid, honestly. Like I believe that we can achieve heaven on earth. I believe that we are put on this planet to eat fruit and have sex and just like enjoy. Like, you know what I mean?
Heck yeah, man.
Like, so they talk about like in the blink of an eye, and it sounds like people disappearing or something like that, you know? And it's like, will something happen with our bodies where our bodies will hit a certain frequency, like on a collective level? And we know like the earth is actually going through, you know, these different crazy transitions right now. In terms of like photon belts that we're moving through and something with like the Schumann resonance. I don't understand it all, but I know that like the planet itself is actually undergoing like some massive changes, and that's affecting all of us collectively. And Aaliyah, you know so much about astrology. I dabble in it and I love it, but I don't like have a great grasp on it. I figured out enough to like figure out what applies to me personally, because I found it to be like a mirror. Hold on, where am I going with this?
While you're thinking of that, let me chime in on the rapture. My 2 cents on that is like, I think those are 2 different things. I think it's possible to, and I don't know freaking anything. Every like 10 minutes, I just let go more of thinking I know what because I used to be like, oh yeah, the rapture, that's dumb. That doesn't exist. And then I heard someone talk about it and I was like, oh, there's like, you know what, maybe it is. There's a little bit of truth in every bit of bullshit. And so like, one, we can ascend to a place of consciousness where we literally just do the Luke Skywalker or whatever and just disappear into ascension and become oneness from our physical living body. So like that's possible. But I think the rapture, I've heard a channeling of like once the planet consciousness, because Gaia, she's a soul just like us, just in a higher octave. She is going into the 4th density, AKA, which is within the 5th dimension. So she's evolving. The whole planet is moving and evolving, going into the age of Aquarius. And as that happens, there's going to be a cutoff point where there's no longer the transition time. It's like the birthing happened. Now we're fully here. We're cutting the umbilical cord. And now it's like anything like moving forward. Once that happens, if there's anyone out of alignment with like the 5th dimension, so to speak, I've heard that is a rapture experience where if they're not compatible with the new frequency of Earth, then there's like this rapture, and then they get to go have an incarnate experience again on a 3rd density system. So yeah, that could be what a rapture is. I don't know. I just heard it. Sounds good.
that would like line up with some of these things about, you know, like what can exist in the presence of God. And it's more of like what can exist at a certain frequency or frequent vibration, right? It's like, oh, sorry, that's not high enough.
Yeah, exactly. I was just listening to a video actually on what we can expect for the full moon coming up. And the guy who was speaking about it had mentioned like, we as a collective are no longer holding space for things that are at a lower vibration than what we are shifting toward. So we are moving into that 4th density, that 4th dimension. And so therefore things that are lower vibrational than we are, that aren't what we can actually see us evolving to, we're not holding space for anymore. Because at that level of consciousness, you're now like, oh, this is my worth as a human being. Well, I guess a soul in a human body, having a human experience. I don't have to hold space for that anymore. You know, I don't have to hold space for that negativity, that job that is not serving me. I don't have to keep doing all this fucking bullshit, 3rd dimensional shit, because it's not in alignment with my higher self. And we feel that collectively. I know so many people that are like in this place where they're like, well, what the fuck now do I do with my life? Like, I'm just kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, you're just comfortable going through the motions, but now you're at the place where you're like, I'm more than that. I deserve more than that. I deserve to live my life every single day like it is my last and just be in my highest vibrational state. And I'm no longer holding space for that other bullshit that's keeping me stuck in that dimension.
You just like spoke exactly what's been on my brain. So this isn't just me.
It's not just you. It's me as well. I'm speaking to myself.
Yes.
And then, okay, so the next question, Aaliyah, can you explain the different dimensions? Like, I think I've been moving through them, but I'm not able to, like, I don't know how to pinpoint, oh, I'm here. You know, like, and can you explain the 4th dimension more? I think that's the one that kind of freaks me out a little bit just because of a lack of knowledge. It seems so unknown. I've heard people, you know, be like, oh, that's where the demons live and that's the reptilians. And it's like, oh, like we want to skip it. I'm like,
Interesting. Okay. So
It's up.
I
You want to embrace it to some extent.
I think we should embrace everything in life. You know what I mean? Like all levels of consciousness. Like I said, when I decided to jump those dimensions and I was like, I'm just going to be where I know, like, I'm going to be that person that I know is already chilling in the fifth dimension. What characteristics do they have? And I'm just going to take that on. And I ignored everything, all the shadow work I needed to do. I didn't go through a dark night of the soul yet at this point. And then like, that's when that had hit me to go back to the third dimension. Because when I felt like, and I could be completely wrong too, right? But what I felt in my soul was me living in the fifth dimension was when I moved across the country, I had no question at all that the universe was going to provide for me. There was no if, ands, or buts about it. I was like, I feel like that's the same belief in people that have a belief in God, right? You're like, no matter what, God will get me through it. I literally I didn't have a job set up. I didn't have a place to live. I packed my car and I moved across the country and I was provided for every single step of the way. And then I had negative energy come into my life to challenge that belief and bring me back to the third dimension. And that's when I started to actually get those thoughts that I feel like a lot of people have where you're doubting yourself. You're like, does the universe really want to provide for me? Does God really have my back? Is this all like, what's the point of all of this? And that's when I went through that dark night of the soul experience. And I feel like in that time I was in the fourth dimension, right? Because I knew I could feel myself there some days in the fifth, but I could also feel myself very much in the real world. And I'm like, okay, well, what's the point of even ascending anyways when life fucking sucks? Like all of this is just so hard, but like I was aware, I was awake to like my feelings and my emotions, but I wasn't vibrating at my fifth dimensional energy. Does that make sense?
I'm wondering, how do you tell the difference between the third and the fourth?
How to know the difference, I feel like, is when you are attaching your feelings to your phone, to physical things, to like your job, your relationships, all of those different things. Like you're relying your happiness on external things. And when I was in the fourth, it was more so like in my own mind. Like I couldn't get out of it, but I was aware of it. You know what I mean? The reason why I was feeling like I was vibrating just a bit lower than I know that I could was because everything was inside of my head that I was feeling. And I was like, I'm in control of this. I know that I control my own reality. And I wasn't necessarily being brought down by external things. It was more so me knowing that it takes me evolving and it's all inside of me. It's that awareness. Like we know that as human beings, as conscious human beings, that it is up to us to create our own reality. So when I think people that are in the third dimension, they often will blame their job, their spouse, like they blame it on other things for why they haven't been happy or why they can't ascend or evolve or be provided for by the universe. You blame it on physical, real world things. And then when I felt like I was vibrating at a lower frequency in that fourth dimension, it was definitely more so inside of my own head. And I'm like, I feel trapped. I feel like I'm being shackled like to this physical world, but emotionally, physically, I'm not actually there. You know what I mean? But it was hard for me to break through that barrier to get back to a place of being able to actually dip into the fifth dimension.
Was it like a cognitive dissonance in the fourth dimension, sort of?
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
I think I've had like a semi-parallel experience.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. That's amazing. So how did it feel for you?
Well, so if I were to apply the different dimensions, right, through this experience, like when I set off to be a missionary in Thailand, right? Or like starting before that, when I had like my first spiritual awakening, it was more like awakening, but it was like through awakening to realize that I had a soul and wasn't just a body, and that came through the church, or it came through Christianity. And then I was like, on fire, quote unquote, for God. And I just had no doubt, like it was just confirmed again and again that I had to go to Thailand. And it was just this, I had no doubt that I'd be provided for. I literally like gave away everything. And I had like a backpack and a sling, and I moved across the world, and I didn't know, like I had a little shot at raising some money, but like it was not sustainable. And I just went, and it was like, and then I hit this wall. I got there, and it was like the presence of God left. And I was like, what the fuck just happened? You know, and then I would say
I have goosebumps right now. I have goosebumps because this is the same thing that I went through.
that began my dark night of the soul. And that lasted for about 9 years, because it was 8 years of marriage.
Shut up.
Before that, maybe. Yeah. And it was just this like, what the fuck is going on? And this like blurry, but I could kind of dip back and forth to some extent. You know, it's like there were times where I hit that bliss, like I had to really push for it, but then I could like experience that. And then there were times where I felt like shackled to the 3D, and I'm just like, you know, woe is me.
Yes.
A lot of it was just spent in this confusion and this haze and in this like inner turmoil. And like all my 3D experiences started to just like pile up. And so it was like this perfect shitstorm. And so it was like a very difficult time. And then I ended up like, I hit this really low point, and then kind of ended up being like slingshotted into the 5th. So I like hit this bliss, but then it's been this like kind of figuring out and navigating since then. I suppose that would be like playing around with the different dimensions.
Yeah, definitely. That's so crazy. It's chilling how similar our experiences are.
Right. So jumping between these different dimensions. Yeah, I think I haven't really put a lot of thought into it, but I guess I probably have been like skipping around between them. It's kind of confusing, you know, because our body is always in this 3D, like in this third dimension, but then it's like we have this internal shift into other dimensions. And that's a bit much for the brain to wrap around.
Right.
A lot.
It makes you feel like you're going crazy sometimes.
And you can sound a little bit woo-woo to some people when we talk about certain things. You know, sometimes I forget, honestly, that like there are people from my high school or people like that I've known in the past that listen to my podcast that have no idea what the fuck I'm talking about. Like they've never heard of any of this. And I'm just like, yeah, align your chakras. Yep. I had an imbalance here in my sacral chakra. And I'm like, you just take this crystal and put it here. And they're just like, what the fuck? You use rocks to heal yourself?
Oh my God. I think you guys do such a good job at relating it to the practical, the reality. It's the feeling. Are you feeling in a place of scarcity and fear and just a hyper awareness of the physical world around you? Or are you feeling in a place of bliss? Is it bliss or is it not? Are you in a place of flow? Did you forget how much, where you are, how much time you're doing this thing? Is it fun? Is it easy? And I think that's the most important thing. And I like to get lost in the terminology and try to figure it all out intellectually. But at the end of the day, it's the feeling, it's the being able to listen to that small voice, tap into your intuition, be able to figure out how to access that place of bliss. That's been like, all of our journey, I think. Like I've been obsessed with trying to figure out how I can live in this blissful, ecstatic state of just laughing and be able to just like be burned alive and just be laughing. Cause it's just like, oh my God, this is such a fun experience. Or being the weird guy at the funeral. It's like, oh yeah, this is such an expansion of energy. Like, oh my God, they are just, oh man, I wish I was in their place, but people, but real life is so weird and messy. And I wanted to circle back just because my intellectual brain is trying to figure out, I've been trying to figure out the fourth dimension for years, ever since like Aaliyah introduced me to the concept of the fifth dimension. Because on her Instagram, it was like 2 years ago, because I never really dove into that stuff. I've always been a spiritual person and under certain lenses, and I know how to listen to my intuition and speak in tongues and pray for miracles and blah, blah, blah. But I like never had this new lens of terminology and new understanding of the moon, the planetary energies of crystals, of different dimensions. And I think at some point there's a beauty in not naming things and just experiencing things. I think that's the most important thing. But you get to a point where it's fun to learn and to explore, and you have to use human language right now, even though I know all of us, some people are just like, I know you two, Aaliyah and Jade, you hate texting more than anyone I know. Both of you are like old men who just like want to call you and show up at the doorstep.
Yeah, I'm trying to come over for tea. Like, I don't really want to fucking exchange words over like a fucking piece of technology.
Yes, thank you.
I freaking love it. I love it. I'm so with, yeah, that's so good. But okay, so like to go back to like putting names on it. So the feeling is the most important thing. And talking about the names of things is whatever. But like, I've heard a lot of things about the fourth dimension, literally just being time. And I think everything is true. So I think like it being the segue gap, I think there's something there. And so I don't know anything, but I've heard like it's literally just, so if you have 1 point, that's the first dimension, that's 1 point. That's just a single awareness and beingness.
I am,
it's just,
right?
The I am. Yep. It's just like a rock. It just is a rock. There's the second dimension, there's 2 points. And so that's kind of the relationship. There's 2 points you experience being in relation. So it's like the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, the bees that serve the queen bee, and they do everything they can to serve that queen bee. There's a wolf pack, or there's like a tree whose roots are connected to all the other trees. Or Jade, you talked about mushrooms, and they're like the mouthpiece of the planet. And like, oh my God, that's so fascinating. And then, so there's the third dimension.
Right? Duality.
Right. Yeah. Duality. Yep. And the third dimension, there's now 3 points. So you can look at everything and see that there's 3 lines. So apparently the fourth dimension is just one more line through it. And that's the illusion of time. That's like eternity. And the fourth dimension is just one more line in the third dimension that you can't really see, but it's like the linear time. It's the past, present, and future. And I don't know how, I don't know, but like, that sounds very interesting to me. And then the fifth dimension is like a new evolution of consciousness, where it's love, where it's you access fully into love. So that's like my vague understanding of it now. But yeah, it's trying to figure out the dimensions. It's fascinating, because it's like, on one hand, it's not like you leave the third dimension and go to the fifth. Maybe you do. Maybe if a civilization is fully in the fifth dimension, you leave. But then there's, other talks of like, oh, you have to, in order to get to the fifth dimension, you got to love the third dimension. And so even if you're existing in the sixth dimension, is there still a third dimensional reality that's grounding the place? I don't know.
The way I might be wrong, but the way I see it is that it's frequencies emitted from our brain, and then through like they come through our biochemistry, right? And so like our body will like move into different frequencies, and those are essentially different dimensions that we can live at, like through our like internal lived experience.
Yeah. So as you're saying that too, both of you guys, I'm thinking like, I see children as fifth dimensional beings because they have no sense of identity. They are free. They will take off their shoes. They will take off their clothes wherever they want. Like they are living how we are supposed to, you know what I mean? Constantly expressing love over and over and over again, until possibly at some point in your childhood, depending on who you were raised by, right? They're taught that they can express love. Or if you grow up in an environment where love is expressed constantly, why wouldn't they stay in that fifth dimensional state of being throughout their whole entire life, right? So an example that I'm thinking about this with is Rodney is one of my friends who has a podcast as well, Moments in Mindset. He, the way he raises his daughter is so beautiful to me. Like the way he talks to her, like she is a human being, and the way she's able to communicate with other people. Like we were out for his birthday and she just went up to a random person and gave him a hug and said, "I love you." Like she just knows no barriers beside like the frequency she vibrates at is love. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And because of who her parents are, I feel like she will always remain in that state, right? There'll be things much like they are for you guys, for me, that will be thrown in her path that will maybe test and challenge those beliefs. But like, why wouldn't she grow up to stay in that fifth dimensional state because of how she was raised and conditioned to believe and feel, you know?
Ooh, I'm super curious with this because I know they're like biologically, like our body goes through these different transitions, right? And like the brain waves change when kids hit like 7 or so, and they move out of that constant theta. But I gotta say, like kids, I agree, they're living in the fifth dimension in that like that bliss spot, but they dip down sometimes. Sometimes they're little assholes. And I don't
So true. So it's like, how can we get to a place where we embody that childlike energy that's curious, always asking questions, free to do whatever they want? Kids will just dance. They will just do it. They're not afraid to ask questions. They'll do whatever the fuck they want. But as we grow up, we're told, don't ask questions, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. And it's conditioning us to be vibrating at that lower frequency, right? We're born into a society that is set up for us to fail, to just be a part of the system, to just blindly like live on this hamster wheel, right? But when you're a kid, you don't even see that. So how can we have that awareness, the childlike awareness of I am free to do whatever I want, create whatever I want, express whatever I want, but also have the understanding that we do now as adults? You know, I feel like that's the balance that I'm trying to find personally, because when I was a kid, I had the most amount of fun, always just endless possibilities of fun with whatever was in front of me or wherever I was at. That's bliss, you know?
I have some thoughts on this. Of like how we can do that, like how we can get into that spot and like raise kids in that spot. And this is just me like brainstorming, right? But like, the conditioning, right? It comes from, there's like societal conditioning and familial conditioning, which is just generational trauma essentially. But the thing is, it comes down to these lies that we're believing. So you can't change a belief until you know what it is, right? Like there's so much power that comes from putting vocabulary to something, giving something words. And so some of the but also a big part of manifestation is that repetition, right? And so some of the things I've been doing to kind of, because I've been working on a level of this myself, like, all right, like, you know, it comes down to like doing your shadow work and what are your blocks and what are the things that you're like, the things you're believing in aren't true. And so I started writing out some of them and then working on them. And it's like, well, what is true? And I came across this super cool therapy recently called, it's ART, but if you look up ART therapy, all you're going to find is art therapy. It's accelerated resolution therapy. And it's similar to EMDR, where you're moving your eyes from side to side while you go back through past experiences, you desensitize them, and then you bring in new experiences and you hype up those types of sensations in your body. And it's like immediate results. So I am finding that I need reinforcement because I noticed this huge shift. I've done a session around my eating disorder. I've done a session around my ex, and then I did a session around my family of origin. And it's fascinating. I'm like, I think we could probably do that by doing something like that, because you're connecting the left and the right sides of the brain, right? So if you can connect the left and right sides of the brain while replaying your childhood with truth rather than these socially conditioned lies, I think we could actually like manifest better, happier lives quickly.
I'm like, I have chills on my body, first of all. And I'm also like, girl, you need to trademark that. Like you need to start some sort of like program or something.
No
and
kidding.
Also, send me an email and I will sign up right away.
There's a link in the description. You can DM Jade if you want a session.
Yeah, actually, I'm starting to do like, I'm lining up ART with, I'm going to get into grasping EMDR a little better, and then as well as neural manifestation. I did this, I was a part of this membership where they were teaching neural manifestation, but through like bringing your brain into a theta state and then reprogramming from there. But the thing was like, it would take months, you know, and I'm like, it's
like months.
Yeah, like time's not real, but when we talk about it like that, like no.
I'm like, I really want an easy button for this. And I found it. And I'm like, oh, so I am beginning to now like observe the patterns, and I'm going to create my own thing, and I'm going to mess around with my own brain on this. But I am looking for test subjects as well who want their brain messed with in the best way possible.
I can't wait. So let's wrap up this episode. Jade, do you have like one along those same lines? Do you have like one tip or one method that you've been learning, something simple that people could do to get access to the fifth dimension, to able to like ground their bliss?
Fucking gratitude, man.
With like the moving your eyes. You just mentioned your art therapy, something along that.
Like what I've been doing is taking traumatic memories and reprogramming them. But I think, and it's like a multi-step process, because I've noticed you have to do it a few times to give your brain a map of what you want it to know. Right. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious, and people could try this out. If you just like go on YouTube, punch in like EMDR light ball, and hey, sweetheart, do the little light ball while visualizing the way that you want things to be. I'm super curious what that would do. And you have like full creative license. Like this isn't on a conscious level. You're not going to think that things happen differently, but on a subconscious level, your brain will, and it will release the like biochemical responses, the appropriate biochemical responses for that experience, even though consciously you're fully aware that, you know, whatever you thought of did not actually happen or exist.
I love that. Yes. And I've been experimenting with this too, of like looking into EMDR, because I know just by activating both sides of your brain and visualizing the like a past and entering into that past scenario, you can imagine a better outcome. You can imagine feeling love and acceptance for your parents that messed you up, for whatever the situation was. And I think it's just a very small step that could maybe you could start addressing those, and like definitely seek help. Like, dude, you know, get it. This isn't like, whatever advice, but it is a simple thing that I think people can do to like, oh, wow, start like seeing and addressing and bringing up old traumas, old experiences, and maybe we can reprogram our brains. So Jade, definitely DM Jade if you want to know more about that. I'll have her links. Follow her TikTok. She posts like some dope ass quick videos on TikTok that'll just go deep. They're beautiful. Oh my God, you'll love it. Follow Jade, follow Aaliyah. Her podcast is awesome. And her link is in the description. So thank you everyone for listening. This has been an absolute pleasure. Stay blessed.